Hi, Kevin.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, I will do a little presentation in Italian and then I come back to you in English. Okay?
Ok, brilliant.
Ok. Ciao ragazzi. Per quelle due persone che non sanno chi sia Kevin Bayliss, faccio un rapido riassunto. Allora, è uno dei grafici più prolifici dell'epoca NES, e Super Nintendo. Ha disegnato l'aspetto della famiglia di Donkey Kong come la conosciamo ancora adesso, cioè nel senso quello che lui ha realizzato all'uscita di Donkey Kong viene ancora utilizzato oggi per il Donkey Kong odierno. Ha lavorato a Killer Instinct, e padre di Battletoads, ha lavorato a Perfect Dark e soprattutto ha fatto Starfox Adventures per GameCube e ieri era il compleanno di Donkey Kong, infatti Donkey Kong Country sta qui. Ha fatto un sacco di cose ed è graficamente una delle persone che ha lavorato di più nell'industria e l'ha portata avanti nell'epoca perché lavorava su dei tool comunque molto all'avanguardia. Che adesso tutti quanti sappiamo che cos'è Maya, tutti quanti sappiamo cos'è Blender, ma all'epoca quando si parlava di Silicon Graphic e altre cose del genere, lui era una delle prime persone a lavorare su dei tool che poi adesso sono diventati qualcosa che l'industria ha trasformato in uno standard. E soprattutto la cosa incredibile è che trova anche il tempo di fare musicista, quindi è una persona veramente incredibile. L'ultimo lavoro che ha fatto insieme a Playtonic è stato Yooka Laylee, in due versioni, una che assomiglia molto a Banjo-Kazooie, un'altra che assomiglia molto proprio a Donkey Kong Country, e adesso ci parlerà del suo lavoro. So Kevin, I said for the two people that don't know who you are, that you have created the graphic design and the appearance of the Donkey Kong family as we know today, and you have worked on Killer Instinct in the arcade when the Nintendo 64 was called Ultra 64. You are the father of Battletoads, Perfect Dark, Starfox Adventure, and you are the lead artist of Playtonic with Yooka Laylee and the two games of Yooka Laylee.
I'm not the lead artist, but well, I mean, we really have a lead artist there, but I'm part of the graphics team at Playtonic. That's right, yeah.
Okay. I'm so excited to hear your story and how was your workflow in these years. So I will start a little video about your work, and I will share the screen.
Excellent.
Okay. So this was your work.
Yeah, it's a mixture of old and newer stuff for about 30 years worth of work now. So yeah, it's quite a mixed bag there. There's some 2D animation, there's some 8-bit animation, 16-bit, and some of the later stuff that I'm doing at Playtonic Games. So yeah, that's I think the newest stuff on there is about 3 or 4 years old, but it just shows a change in the work that I've been doing over the last 30 odd years.
Yes,
so.
you continue to study because you have grown as an artist and as a graphic designer. I've seen the new character for Yooka Laylee. It's really on the standard of the industry. Most of the person that work from in your camp in graphic design, that not everyone will continue to study and grow as a graphic designer, but they still to stop to study and doing just the thing that they can do. But you keep studying and you keep growing as an artist.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was going to mention when I was talking about careers a little bit later is to just try and keep pushing yourself to do some different kind of style and know your stuff, but it's good to try some new styles and some new things, and because people, although they like to see something that they're familiar with, it's nice to sort of push it a little bit. But I think you can still tell when an artist does some work, you can still, there'll always be a hint of that guy's personality in the work that they do. And so I think you can probably see, or anybody that knows me from working with me knows when I've drawn something or when I've animated, is Kev's done that because he does this with his eyes or whatever. So
the googly eyes on the character of the rare in Banjo-Kazooie and something is your idea?
No, that's the designers at Rare. I think it was Greg and Steve, to the Males brothers there. But it's one of the things that we've kept going. It's a cool little idea that we use.
Because I was doing this when you were talking. So.
Everybody loves googly eyes. So.
Yeah, they are amazing.
Ultra cheap character.
Yeah. Okay, so you want to show us your work?
Yeah, I've got a screen which I can present here. I can see if this works. You have to tell me if it's going to work. Share screen 2, and is that there?
Okay, it's working.
You can see. Can you see me and the screen, or can you just see the screen?
We can see you and the screen, but the screen is the most important thing.
And I've now got a call from. So, apologies, that was a good start, wasn't it? So, okay, so we're on slide 1 here, and you can see this. Okay, this is coming through. All right, yes. Yeah. You've got.
I really like the part when you say being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably true for my career anyway. I was very lucky to have been in the right place because I was not living too far away from the company that was one of my favorite video game companies that existed at the time. And also it was the right time for me because I'd finished school and I wanted to get into video games, and I was a bit of a dilemma because I didn't really know which way to go at that time, because it was the mid 80s and the video game industry was very much alive and kicking, but I don't think anybody knew what to make of it. And so there was very little in the way of assistance or advice at the time. So anyway, have we got a different slide? Can you see that? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, the story began when I was playing a lot of the handheld electronic video games that you would have bought from the local electronics store. We had a store called Dixon's, which would stock all of the toys. And for Christmas, there would be something like Astro Wars or a miniature Pac-Man machine. And so that was where it all sort of began. getting hooked on those things. I used to be really into nature, and I used to sit in the back garden looking into a pool of water, which was full of frogs and toads and things like that. But then I discovered these electronic video games, and that was that. I never sat outside again. I just got hooked on these machines. So we would go to the local supermarket, and you'd start to see the odd appearance of a video game. I think something like Space Invaders or Asteroids would appear. And I was just fascinated by that. And maybe I'd have an hour or so to play on that while my parents did the shopping. And so my brother and I would sit and play that for a couple of hours. And then we were lucky enough to get at some point an Atari VCS at home. It was actually my brother's. And so the video game scene had very much hit the Bayliss household then. And it was part of everyday life for me. I'd always play a video game, and I'd never seen anything like it. I just thought it was kind of magical. So at that point in time, the home computer scene in the UK was really sort of starting to take off. And there were machines like the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64, and some of the earlier machines like the ZX81, which had no sound and no color and very, very limited graphics. I really wanted one of those. And so I kidded my parents and told them that this was help me for my schoolwork, and so could we get one? And so I remember going to somebody's house and buying a secondhand ZX81 because they were upgrading to a ZX Spectrum, and being really fascinated by all of these the covers of these little games. Can you still see me on camera?
Yeah,
you can.
but it's just me, because the public can just see your screen.
Okay.
So if you want, you have to stop the.
It's okay. I'll stick with the screen, but I say these games. If you can see it there, Marco, the games.
I remember them. I had the same games.
They're all on cassette, and you had to sit there and wait for it to load. And it had just something about the anticipation of waiting for a game to load. You used to take a lot of time looking at the title pages as they came up, and
the color stripes.
Yeah, it would look fantastic. You'd sit there mesmerized, and then you'd see this picture start to build up. And so I just totally bought into that, and I'd go into my brother's room and play on his ZX Spectrum, and I'd play all of these games like Night Law and Underworld, and I just thought it was amazing because it was this new world. And so I wanted to do that for a living, but as I say, back then at school, you tell the careers officer that was supposed to help you and point you in the right direction for getting a job, that you wanted to work in video games, and I was told that I was just living on cloud nine, and I didn't know what I wanted, and it didn't exist. And so I didn't really know what to do. So I went to college for a little time. I was only about 16 at the time. I left school quite early. I went to college and continued to do a computer studies course, which I'd just basically done at school. But I found it all kind of boring, because we'd really just done that a couple of years at school. And I saw an advertisement in the local newspaper, and it was a company called Rare Limited, who were just looking for artists and people to join their team. I didn't know anything about them, so I went for an application through that process, and I got a job there, which cut a long story short. And then after I did the time at Rare.
How old was you?
I was 16 then, so that was that stage in my life, that early leaving school time, right up until 2005, and then I think I'd always wanted to do music too, so I did this kind of midlife crisis band thing and joined a rock band and did that because I just thought it was fun. And then I spent a few years doing some concept artwork for a couple of companies. They were actually doing video games and other kinds of stuff. And then in 2015, I joined Playtonic Games and started working on Yooka Laylee. So, but where it all began, if you'll pardon the pun, is in a little town, a little village actually called Twycross in the UK. And the only thing this place is famous for is having a quite a good zoo. And as soon as I told everybody I'd got this job at Twycross, which is where Rare were based, they all assumed that I was working at this zoo and cleaning the signs and cleaning out the monkeys' cages and stuff like that. But it wasn't like that at all. I was working at this amazing place, and I can remember my parents dropped me off there because I couldn't drive, and I met this guy one evening called Tim Stamper, and I didn't know who he was. And he showed me some artwork, and what I'd done is to get the interview with Tim, I'd drawn some pictures on my Commodore 64, and it had a little bit of music playing along the bottom of the screen, and I sent that on one of those cassettes that I just showed you, and I got a call from Tim saying, "Would you like to come and say hi and have a look around?" And I agreed to come around because my parents could drop me off there. And I went into this room, and he brought out these enormous pieces of artwork, which he'd hand airbrushed. And it was all of these lovely pictures, which were the covers for the hit games at the time that everybody was playing on the ZX Spectrum. And I was just amazed. And as soon as he showed me, my jaw dropped, and I says, "Yeah, I want to work here." And they showed me around. And I had no computer graphics skills really, other than drawing the odd thing with an editor, which I'd written myself on my Acorn Electron and using some software on the Commodore 64. So I didn't know what to do.
Yourself. Sorry.
One piece, my friend and I, we wrote a piece of software on, we had a home computer called the Acorn Electron, which was a cut price BBC Micro. And we wrote some software in BASIC just to allow us to draw graphics on there. And so we would spend forever. I would put some cling film, some cellophane on the screen after I would trace a picture and put it on the screen. And then I would use my mouse and trace my sketch. And then I would use that as a guide.
I've done the same.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
It was a good method. But so anyway, I was lucky enough to get Tim to say, "Do you want to come and work here?" And of course I said yes. And it was happiness from day one, really, because the first thing I was given was something really small to work on, like some prizes for a video game called Wheel of Fortune, which is an NES game. We were heavily into producing game show versions of video games, video game versions of game shows. And for America, they were really popular. So we did Wheel of Fortune, Hollywood Squares, Double Dare, and a lot of other titles for the first portion of my time at the company. And I slowly began to learn from there, because Tim showed me how to draw the sprites, how to work out how to construct the images from 8x8 pixel blocks, and how to arrange them and how to animate. And so he showed me everything at that point, and taught me how to do graphics. And it was a very good teacher, and I didn't think I'd ever be able to manage it, but the more games you did, the more experience you picked up. And we went on from NES to Super Nintendo, N64 and GameCube, and then I left the company in 2005 to do my other bits and pieces, like joining a band and silly stuff like that. But for a long period of time, it was just from school until my early 30s, I was working on video games for mainly Nintendo. So
how was this starting with the NES and ending with a console like the GameCube? It was a really a curve of growth is incredible. It's like you have done all the stuff that a normal person will never experience, because you have started with the first video games, and you are still doing video games. And how was this working on the early games and ending with the games right now?
yeah, I feel very lucky to have seen that progress with graphics in particular throughout all of the years that I've worked on them, because I mean, when you look back and the things that we were playing at school on our handheld machines, they didn't have any animation. They just had lights that basically flicked on and off to give you the impression of something moving. And so when I went to Rare and they started to give me a course on how to do the animation and how to put things, I thought it was magic, because you were almost like a cartoonist. And the other thing I wanted to do was make cartoons. And so I've got all of this freedom to put what characters that I wanted to put in and how I wanted them to move, because there wasn't really a lot of direction. There was no real hierarchy. Tim Stamper and myself were pretty much the art department for a few years. And Tim would get on with whatever game he was on and give me some assistance, but I was kind of left to my own devices to do whatever frames of animation I wanted. And so I'd look at other games and I'd see what they were doing and how they were making things look more dynamic. And so, but now I remember one of the biggest things for me, as you say, was even when we were looking at the GameCube, and I'd seen such big changes with artwork and the technology, it was never good enough. You always wanted to do more. And I can remember wanting to see real shadows on characters and real reflections. And then, as I said, I left the industry for about 10 years. And when I came back, all of those things were back. Everything that we dreamed of doing before I left the industry and came back into it, it was there now. But it's funny because even though they look amazing now, and games, they just blow me away the way they look now, I still look at some of these old titles and there's just some magic there that I don't think you always get nowadays, because you use your imagination a little bit more when you're playing the game. I mean, you have to imagine that this guy is actually, I don't know, a werewolf or something like that. And it's just one color. But we progressed from the game shows and things like that. And I think it was in the early 90s that Tim said that we wanted to have our own set of characters, which we could use as a mascot for Rare Limited. And he wanted a brand which didn't belong to anybody else, and we could market and get a TV show from, and bedspreads and toys and cans of baked beans. We just wanted something that we could push. And so he asked me to come up with something. And I started drawing. I went back to the whole nature thing, because I said that I used to be looking at frogs and toads in the back garden when I was a kid. And so I went back to there, and I was also into martial arts at the time. I was trying to keep fit. I can't do that now. But when I was about 17 or 18, I can remember I was always going to karate a couple of times a week with my friends, and I'd watch Bruce Lee videos. And so I wanted to make these characters, all sort of kung fu masters that were toads and frogs and things. And I called them the amphibians. And Tim didn't really like the name of that. So we had a play around, and we came up with the Battletoads idea. And we added the big fists and the ram's head and everything like that to make them a little bit different and to stand out. But it was great because I was doing cartoon work, martial art work, and I was doing video games all in one go. So it was great. And also we got the toys and we got the arcade machines there, and we even got a cartoon which didn't do so well at the time, but I was just blown away by what we'd actually achieved with it. So
yeah, it's an amazing achievement, and the name Battletoads is very badass.
It's a fun. I mean, it's just a silly thing, really. I've got these guys
but
here now, but if you look at it now, it's changed a great deal, and it's a lot more modern looking, and it's a lot more humorous. But I mean, back in the day, this was the kind of style that everything was. So I think it was right at the time. So a quick look at what we would do to create the graphics back then. if you imagine you've got a character like this and you would draw a few sketches of how you wanted them to move on paper. And at Rare in particular, anyway, some companies were using digital software to create their graphics, but Tim was quite traditional, and we'd always animated everything on paper. So you'd have a great big drawing board, like a draftsman's drawing board, and it was full of all of these fluorescent strips. And you would place this piece of paper on your drawing board, and with the limitations of whatever system you're working on, which was the NES or sometimes the Game Boy, you would draw and you would box off all of the sketching into tiny little pixels, and then you'd have to work out all of the data to put that onto a disk and then go and sit with a software engineer. And I might have been working with maybe 3 software engineers at the time, because I was perhaps working on 3 different games. I can remember at one time I was working on Nightmare on Elm Street, a gymnastics game, and I think possibly it was Who Framed Roger Rabbit or Battletoads or something like that. But there was often myself running up and down the stairs in this farmhouse to 2 or 3 different software engineers to give them a disc which I'd just drawn some characters on, and then we put them in and just see what they look like. But so the first step was to have your sketch, and then, as I say, you would overlay a grid so that you could see some kind of pixelation. Can you see that on the screen? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So as I say, on top of this huge board, this would get illuminated like a light box, as they would have done at a cartoon company like Disney, as you often saw on TV. They would be drawing over these things, and then you'd have to position them in such a way that you could get as many pixels for your artwork as possible, so it would fill out these boxes really well. And then you would stick some sellotape over the top of it and a piece of tracing paper. And the amount of paper that was in the company was unreal. There was stacks of paper by me, so there was a no smoking policy, because everything could just go up in flames at any time. And I would just get through all of this paper every day and scribble stuff on it. And I think every week my face would get browner and browner, because I was actually getting a suntan from this great big, what was basically a sunbed that I was lying on to draw my images. And it probably wasn't the healthiest thing to do, but it was the only way you could see what you were doing. So you'd get them all positioned, and then you'd get a pencil and you'd start sort of drawing over the image like this, and just creating some kind of curvature to make a kind of shape based on what your character was underneath. So if you can see there, it was basically pixelating the image that you'd got beneath it. And sometimes you'd have to move the paper, or you may go and have your lunch and you'd come back and find out that maybe you'd moved the paper a little bit. And so all of your work needed to be done again, because you'd moved it and you had to reline everything up. So it was quite a laborious process, because the fun part of drawing it, that was great, but you'd think to yourself, how am I going to make this look good in 3 colors and with 32 pixels high? It's not going to work. But then you'd get yourself some pens, and we used to use these magic markers, and there were a lot of different methods you could use, but the method that Tim would always use was to take 3 different shades of the same color, which the Nintendo NES had a good palette for 3 different shades of the same color. And you would just kind of build up a light source and work out where your light's coming from, and just try and shade this character based on how you would want the light to hit it. So it started to look more solid. And it was kind of difficult to see how it was looking, because you were so close to it. Your head was literally inches away from this sort of A4 size piece of paper. The only way you could tell how something was going to look was to get up off your seat and stand by the door of the room and screw your face up and try to envision it. And if you made a mistake, you couldn't rub this stuff out, and you couldn't press undo or delete, because it was just on paper. So you needed to get a scalpel, which was incredibly unsafe, because it was like a surgical scalpel, a really sharp blade, and you'd very slowly, like restoring a painting, scratch away all of the paint, all of the ink that you'd put on to remove pixels that you didn't want. And then when you would put the new ink on, it would go like it'd splurge, and it wouldn't take up the same way as the original ink would, but you'd eventually end up with a piece of paper that looked like this. And so this was often what you'd see on my screen. But it was quite a hazardous process, and you'd often cut yourself and have plasters on. But yeah, so as I say, you have to screw your face to see whether you could envision what the character was going to look like. And then you'd sort of do a flip book with one piece of paper and another to try and gauge some animation. And you'd only have like 2 or 3 frames for a run. So you'd have to try and make things repeat. And then the next thing you'd have to do was you'd have to split this thing up into 8x8 boxes, and you position them as efficiently as you could across the character, and you try and get as few of them as you could in there. And then you'd work out the data for that, and you'd store it on a disk. And then you would go up and you'd see the software engineer, and there would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 of these squares called sprites to make up the character. And
you can do mistakes.
You would make, I would decode it incorrectly, and maybe his leg would be in the wrong place, and then the software engineer would say, that's too many sprites. We don't need his tail to be this long. Can you make his tail shorter? Or they would just remove this sprite here, and they would move his arm, and then you would say, this is my baby. You can't do this. And when you saw it running around on screen, you couldn't notice that his arm wasn't there, because it was just so small. But then we moved on from that stage, and Chris Stamper developed some hardware which was capable of displaying the graphics in 3D, like for sprites, but with an editor that we'd wanted to use for years. And it was based on a piece of software called Deluxe Paint, which at the time was very popular. It was very similar to this Amiga software.
Yeah.
And so also video cameras at the time had just become really popular, and had become a lot cheaper to buy. And so these little handy camcorders would be set up on our screen, on our desk, sorry, and we put them on a tripod, and we were using them anyway sometimes to digitize some of the pictures that we would draw before we would try and put them under. If you could imagine, for the game RC Pro-Am, there was like a model of a car in the center of the screen, and there was a video camera pointing at it. And then Tim would take pictures of the car throughout a 360 rotation. And then he would put those pictures underneath the tracing paper here. And then he would start to pixelate the shape of the car. And that's how we did some of the graphics, like for
like the sprites on Prince of Persia.
Yeah, it was very, very early digitizing. So we took that idea, and we got the video camera, and we kept that, but we linked it up digitally to our editor, which Chris Stamper had made. And then we took a picture of whatever we'd drawn, or maybe it was a model of something, and then we'd have it on screen here, and then we could clean it up, and we could add pictures, extra pixels to it. And then we could maybe store 8 different images. And so we could cycle forwards and backwards to get animation. And of course, you didn't need to decode it. And if you made a mistake, you just pressed undo rather than cutting your finger. And you didn't have to screw your eyes up anymore. And you didn't need these huge, big desks in the room anymore. And so it was a much easier process for creating graphics. And it was great, because you could quickly flip something horizontally, and you could copy and paste stuff. So it was like magic. We thought we'd arrived when we started doing this.
It was common to create the software by yourself in that era.
I think we were quite lucky, because Chris was very experienced with this hardware. He'd created an arcade board called the Raz board at the time, and I think this software was based on a lot of the hardware which he created for that Raz board. And so some guys would write their own tools. and maybe sometimes you would buy. I mean, I think Tim was always kind of against buying and using other people's tools, because he always thought that we could actually write what we needed to do very well ourselves.
Okay.
And so we had the people there to do it, and so we would do that, and often we would have editors like this written. But we used to use a very early Wacom tablet, which the pen wasn't Bluetooth. It had a cord running from the a cable running from the box to the board and to the pen, and often this cable would break, and so your mouse would, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but your mouse would start sort of gesturing around on screen like this, and you know, it was, you can see my pointer on there now, can't you?
Yeah.
So,
I see your point. I understand.
So yeah, you'd put it here and you start drawing this bit, and then suddenly it'd flick over here, and that was the 16-bit era, really, and that's when we were creating graphics to begin with for the Super Nintendo and for the Game Boy. And I think around about that time, there were a few films that were hitting the cinema, like Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park. And I think the first one that we saw that really got our attention was called The Abyss.
The Abyss, yes.
And it kind of blew us all away. And I went into Tim's office one day, and he was looking at a brochure on the software which was used to create the graphics for the movie The Abyss. And I didn't know whether he was serious about it or whether he was just looking this, because he always had a lot of projects on the go. He would do a lot of his own thing in his spare time. And so I thought it was just something that he was going to experiment with in his own time, but he was serious about getting this hardware for Rare. And I didn't quite understand how we would get to put that into a Super Nintendo. But at that time, I was working on the Battletoads coin-op, and I was quite happily using the 2D editor, this thing, to create the graphics for these guys that are running around on screen here. And I was hand animating it. I was drawing things on paper, digitizing it with a camera, and then putting it into the editor, and then pixelating it and drawing all of the frames of animation, and then taking the disc up to the software guy, and that's how it was working. It was working really well. And so I was quite pleased with the way the arcade game was looking. But then the next thing I know, Tim has given me this amazing machine, this silicon graphics machine, which was used to make the graphics in these films. And so I started to look at the software, this amazing software called Alias Power Animator at the time. And I thought, I'm going to try and get something from this 3D software into this Battletoads coin-op, and we'll see if we can do this. And I built this very, very crude looking ship. It was just two long sort of fuselage shapes. And what it was actually the Battletoads logo made to look like a spaceship. And when I turned it on its size, it's actually a Battletoads head. It's actually the logo with two thrusters underneath it. And I built it in 3D, and I rendered it out in the 3D software, and I tried to put it into the game, but it was too many colors. And then we got a software guy to work out an algorithm to take it into a much smaller color palette. So it only used 16 colors, or 15 actually. It's 15 colors and a transparent. So it was 16 colors in total, and transparent being the cell color, because it was actually a big sprite. And I think I'd got maybe 10 frames of animation of the camera or the ship moving and tilting on an axis. And I put it in and it worked, and it looked like they were sitting in this ship. And that was the first 3D graphics that I ever did, which actually went into a video game. And I'm pretty sure I hadn't seen it anywhere else. So who knows, maybe it's one of the first rendered graphics in any video game. I don't know. I'm not going to claim that I was the first to do it, but Battletoads Arcade, it's a very old game now, and I don't think I saw anything else quite like that. So knowing that worked, I then rendered up a couple of other things. And if you can see these balls here that came rolling out towards the screen, we had a sprite scaling thing going on. and I rendered maybe 5 frames. So these balls have got a great big checker pattern on them. So just to get the pixels to move from here to here and then cause it to loop, it didn't need too many frames. And so it would cycle and look like the whole thing was rotating. And so we'd scale that and they came out towards the screen. And so, hey presto, we had very pixelated looking 3D graphics in the arcade game.
Yes, but right now you are making your own rules because there was nothing before this. So you have to create your own rules for creating 3D sprite and something like that on video games. So
it was fun experimenting.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Battletoads was ultimately a fighting game, like a beat 'em up. You call it a scrolling beat 'em up, but it had a lot of other elements in there too. But I'd always wanted to work on a fighting game. It's all I ever wanted to do. And I think I'd done plenty of Street Fighter style mock-ups of Battletoads on a VS screen, but they never got made. And I was always giving Tim designs for beat 'em up games and 4-player beat 'em up games that I wanted us to do, but we never really did any until we started Battletoads. And so I started, when Battletoads was finished, I started experimenting with trying to make some characters that were using this 3D software. And so I made some humanoid characters, but they weren't looking realistic because at the time, the video game graphics that you could produce with this 3D software, they looked amazing, but they didn't look organic. It was difficult, unless you were very experienced, to make really organic looking objects. And compared to what the software can do now, it's called Maya now, and it's one of the leading pieces of software that the artists use. It's progressed such a long way. But back then, if I wanted an arm, it looked like a crude toy for a kid, because you would just almost put a ball joint on every limb so that it could animate easily. But it didn't matter, because when you rendered it out, it came out in a small resolution, which was 320 by 240 pixels. And so you'd got maybe 64 pixels high for a character. So you couldn't see any of these ball joints. You just saw so much detail blend in, but you did pick up the 3D shape and the characteristics, all of this natural phenomena that you could produce in this 3D software, like chrome and water and fire. And so I started to make these characters based on all of these elements. And I started to put a demo together, and we called it Brute Force. And we got a boxing guy who eventually became TJ Combo, and we'd got a girl character, and we'd got this ice guy, I think, and a few other characters. And we'd got this running on the RAS board, I think, which I'd mentioned was Chris Stamper's hardware for the arcade machine. So it could cope with more colors, and it could cope with bigger sprites than the Super NES could. And so the characters were looking quite nice. And I'd come up with all kinds of different ideas. I think I'd even come up with, I bought a projection monitor, like a slideshow monitor. And I had some grids made up, bright red grids, really high definition grids. And I got this guy to sit in a chair, and I projected this grid onto his face. And I took the data from this grid and I made it into an image. So it was sort of transferred to his face. And then I put it into the Alias software, and I started tracing these curves. And it was recreating the guy. His name was Simon Farmer. He was one of our games testers at the time. And I just built this model, and it started to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I made this character, and it was going to be like a cyborg character. I couldn't make the rest of the character look organic. So I put this head that I'd built by using this projection method onto like a cyborg robot character. And the game was originally going to be all robots, but then we started to move on and add all of these fire characters and ice characters. And it was looking great.
And skeletons.
And skeletons too, that's right. And lizards, everything, you name it. We wanted the variety in there, but it started off as something very different. And we got a visit scheduled from Nintendo, just coincidentally, and they were coming over to see what we'd got, because at the time, I think Nintendo had bought a small percent of the company. And we were working very closely with them on different projects. And they came to have a look at what we're up to. And they also wanted to see if they could bring anything new to rival Sega's Aladdin game, which was a beautifully animated game. And it was boasting animation from Disney animators, professional trained animators, and it looked fantastic. And they needed something that was going to look pretty special. And we just happened to be using this 3D technology to render our graphics up. And they looked at the demo that I was working on for what was brute force at the time. And of course, they loved it. And so there was no question about it. This was the way forwards, and this is the way things needed to look. Although Aladdin looked fantastic and it looked very beautiful, it still looked like a cartoon video game. Whereas these things, when they moved around, they looked real and they looked solid, because every shadow and every reflection, it was rendered up into a small sprite, and it inherited all the characteristics of whatever kind of material you were putting onto the model.
So you was working on this demo by yourself?
At this point, it was myself and a software engineer, and I was hand animating everything. And so the animation was very robotic looking, which didn't matter because the guys were mainly going to be robots. But the next thing I know, Tim Stamper comes back and says they want us to do a game based on one of their characters, which has been shelved for almost, I don't know, 10 years or something like that. And he came into my office and showed me a fax, and on the fax was a picture of Donkey Kong. He said, it's great, and they want us to try to put this character into this 3D style that we've got here. And so I had to mess around, and I started coming up with some ideas. And they said that they wanted us to Nintendo said that they wanted to kind of bring it up to date. And so the original character here was Shigeru Miyamoto's character, which you saw in the Donkey Kong series, which you would have played in the arcade. And I was very used to doing very compact, square-looking characters, which would fit into maybe 4x4, 8x8 sprite characters to keep it compact so that it was easier for hits and better for gameplay. And so I tried to sort of design a character which, when you rotated it, it kind of filled this area and it would work well on a platform. And as you can see, it was basically a Battletoads head, because there wasn't really anything wrong with the original design that Shigeru Miyamoto had done. And so I'll just put this face on it and make him look a bit chunkier. And Tim got back to me a couple of days later and says, yep, they like it, build it. And so I started making this model. And it was a little bit crude looking. As you can see here on the joints, there's no filleting or organic transition from the wrist. Everything's sort of ball joints. But we then started putting together a demonstration cartridge to take to, I can't remember, it was the CES show at the time, to just give a view of what we were creating. And all of these pixels, they blurred into one another. And because we got our editors, we could take these images into our 2D editor and start using the smudge tool to go over any of the bits that were really noticeable. But you had to be careful what you were doing, because if you weren't careful, you would damage the shadow or something like that, and you would ruin the whole illusion. But now, of course, we had to learn how to use the software to 3D animate, and it was very different to animating things in 2 dimensions. And I think for Killer Instinct,
and it was nothing robotic. It was a really organic creature, so it was more difficult.
it had to look realistic. Otherwise, it was just going to look like a lot of artificial characters running around like robots. And so we invested in this motion capture software, and we started, it was very, very early motion capture software. It wasn't cordless. We got to make this suit ourselves, which had all of these magnets running down them, and they would run into your arms and pick up the rotations, and so that I'd record my movements for what was Killer Instinct. But for Donkey Kong, once I'd done my small demo and I'd started moving back onto Killer Instinct, the team that were working on Donkey Kong started refining some of the characters and building them and learning how to use the software and learning how to animate. And there was no courses or anything. We just had this huge stack of manuals, and everybody would sort of teach each other and learn how to use that software themselves. And so it was a really exciting time, because you would try out new ideas with that. And but it was a lovely time to work on it, because it didn't matter what you did with your model. It could be, you could really make something quite crude look great by tidying it up, or you could forget about, maybe this is cutting into this because it's only going to be so many pixels big. And so we kind of got spoiled with that, because you could have these beautiful textures and you could have all of these shadows and highlights and reflections, and everything was looking great. And so Donkey Kong Country was born, and it looked like this. And so people still remember it today. And so I think it's 40 years ago that Donkey Kong originally hit the scene. I think it was his birthday yesterday, but this was a nice thing to have been involved with, when you consider how long the character's been on the scene.
And the character is still looking like this. The model is refined, the model is new, but the core graphic is the same.
Yeah, he's got fur now. I think we added fur to him at some point once the technology could do that, and we lost this ragged looking plastic suit that he got on. But he's the same shape, essentially. He's been, but if he was to compare the two, he's been improved, and he looks a little bit more modern now. So, but the basic character is still the same. And so that was our 3D rendered sprites era. And then came the N64, which was real 3D. And we got so used to using all of these colors and curves and textures for our characters. It was a real culture shock for us to have to suddenly start again and build these triangular looking characters, which had got very, very few textures on. And so you almost built up a style. And when we saw what Nintendo had done with Mario and how they'd kept everything very clean looking with Mario 64, you wouldn't really use a texture to give a character maybe a wrinkled skin color or something like that. You just use it to give it small pieces of definition, like eyes or a belt or maybe a smile in the eyeballs, because the textures were so small. They were very, very small resolution. And so this was Diddy Kong Racing, which was probably one of the most enjoyable games I worked on. I loved working on Killer Instinct 1 and 2, but in particular, I think Diddy Kong Racing, another favorite genre was racing games. And this game had so much color, and it had the adventure element to it.
The adventure element was really amazing. It was just mind-blowing for me.
It was fun.
Because I was from the Mario 64, then Mario Kart 64, then I put this in my Nintendo 64, and I see the adventure mode, and I was like, oh my god, this is what I always wanted and never had. So it was really
and this
amazing. Variation
of vehicles too. It was you got 3 different kinds of vehicle to learn to ride and race with, and there was the the adventure element, and there was the VS modes. Where you could all play 4 players, and it was just a great, colorful, atmospheric game. I just wish it would, at the time, if only it could have run at a slightly higher frame rate, it would have really felt good. But at the time, you look at it, and I think it was a great looking game. And so I really did enjoy working on that. But we moved on from the N64, and I think recently there was the old N64 cartridge with the original version of Dinosaur Planet on there.
Yeah.
That I think, I mean, I had forgotten how it looked when we first began working on it, but that was using the textures that we'd managed to get better textures on there and give more detail. And the teams had all worked on other projects like Banjo-Kazooie, and so we'd evolved with the N64, and we'd improved what we were doing visually and technically. So it was great when we got hold of the GameCube, and we could have these great textures which had got almost like a physical base rendering. You could have some sort of bump mapping on them and some real lighting and some proper shadows on there, and we'd even got fur on this game, and grass and particles on the floor. And so it was one of the first games that we said we're going to really make this game look like a movie, and we started to add the dialogue and had the use of the CD to bring all of the audio to life. And I think this was, I think for me, for all of the games that I worked on, I think it did everything that I ever wanted to do. It had a great adventure element. It looked colorful. It didn't take itself too seriously. And then, of course, we had the amazing opportunity to create a Starfox game from what was originally a game which wasn't going to be as popular because it was an unknown character. And we knew that once we had the opportunity to put Starfox in there and marry our two IPs together, it was going to be a great looking game. And I'm really proud of this one. And I see that you showed me the box that you own.
Yeah, and this was 60 frames per second, so
it was great frame rate.
Yeah,
and the artwork, I think we had some great concept artists join the company at that time, because there was no longer one software engineer, one graphics guy working with three software engineers. You'd now got a whole team of artists. Some of them were specialized in animation, some of them were specialized in concept art, some of them were specialized with modeling.
The shaders, the shaders of the grass, it was really the shader of the water. It was a really incredible game.
It looks good now. When I look at it now, when I look at YouTube,
yeah,
it does. It still holds up. But also the fun that we had giving it kind of a cinematic feel and adding voices to the characters. As I say, I was lucky enough. It was one of those things a lot of people didn't want to do, because you were going to get a bit embarrassed and have to make silly voices. But we'd got a great sound studio there, and so we were going to record our own voices, because we got 200 people that were all really in love with the game that they were working on. And so we all had a go, and I did the Whiz Pig and Jago and I think Glacius. I think to create the sound effects for Glacius on Killer Instinct, I had a mouthful of yogurt at the time to create these strange sounds. And Prince Tricky is really annoying voice in Dinosaur Planet.
It really is annoying.
But that's me. I'm sorry. So, and then I moved on to Perfect Dark Zero, which again, the game was already in development, but it had picked up a pace with the technology, and they were looking at a lot of new procedures like normal mapping to get extra detail on the characters and make them look a lot more realistic. And we were working on Perfect Dark and on the N64, but when we were producing Perfect Dark Zero, it looked very realistic originally. And I think Tim and Chris had a meeting about it, and they would obviously go through all of the games at the company and say what they wanted to get changed with this game and that game. And unfortunately, it looked fantastic. It looked great. It looked realistic, but it wasn't the same kind of style that Rare had been known for producing. Everything that we'd done was a kind of a cartoon style. And so I was asked to move on to the game to sort of cartoon it up a little bit based on a fantastic concept artist called Will Overton, who is very famous for doing a lot of video game magazine artwork in the UK from a magazine called Super, and he worked at Rare for quite a while. I think he may even be back at Rare now doing some concept art, but Will would create these cartoon graphics, and then I would build them along with the other guys, and we'd try and make the whole thing look a lot more like a cartoon. And eventually Perfect Dark Zero was the game that we released, and it was a lot more colorful than what it looked like originally. It didn't look quite so realistic, but and great technical game. But unfortunately for me, that was when I thought I needed to get a break from video games, because I'd been in that industry for so long, since I was 16, and I didn't know anything else. And so I was kind of all video gamed out for a little while. So I took a break from it, had my midlife crisis, and I joined a band. And that was good fun. It was one of the other things I always wanted to do. And it meant that I could still scratch the itch of doing graphics, because I would do all of the graphics for the band. I'd always wanted to do music. I think when I first got paid at Rare, I bought myself some electronic music equipment, and Tim asked me to come up with an adventure theme tune for a game that we were working on, and I did it. And I did a really bad Battletoads theme tune, but it wasn't as good as Dave's stuff. And my good friend Dave Wise was a musician for all those years, and I'm still in touch with him now. He's still one of my best pals. So I kind of knocked that whole music thing on the head about 7 or 8 years ago now, and then joined Playtonic Games in 2015, and they launched a Kickstarter. And for anyone that doesn't know who Playtonic Games are, they are basically a core group of artists and animators and software engineers and designers from Rare, from the time when they were producing Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, and Donkey Kong Country. And about 25 people put themselves together. Sorry, just have a drink. And they launched a Kickstarter campaign, which did amazingly well. And we got a huge backing from all of these fans that wanted to see a game that was going to be branded the spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. And it was a lot of fun to write. And I got an email from the guy, Gavin Price, who was heading the company and kind of behind the whole thing. And when I saw all of the people that were on that list that the email was sent to, I knew it was going to work. And so I said, yeah, I haven't seen these guys for 10 years. And I just seized the opportunity to go and work with them again. And I've been working with them ever since. And since then, we've produced Yooka Laylee and the Impossible Lair, which was released in 2019, which is a brilliant game, combining platform elements and a kind of a 3D overworld. So if you haven't looked at that already, I would check that out, because it's a great fun game. And
I can confirm it's really fun, and it's like a Donkey Kong Country with some twists, so it's really amazing.
I think it compares well to the first game, because it takes the universe of Yooka Laylee to another level, but you can see that there's more polish because the team was bigger and we had a little bit more time to work on it, and perhaps we didn't have the pressure of the Kickstarter to get several different versions done, and we didn't go through any console changes at the time. So it was a great game to work on. And obviously we're working on new stuff, but Playtonic Games are also now a publisher, and we've got a number of titles that we've just released. I don't know if I've got those on the link, but if you check out Playtonic Games' website, you can see what some of the other games that we've published and news of what we're going to be doing in the future. So yeah,
I've seen a Yooka Laylee board game, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, we're trying to expand that. We can get that universe out there. So
yeah,
and it's a nice fun. It kind of epitomizes the style of the typical game that the guys would have worked on back in the day, and we're trying to make it present day sort of style, but it's still very much the same kind of humor as we would have done when we were writing Banjo-Kazooie and that kind of stuff. So And so that's what I'm doing now. And in my spare time, which I don't have a lot of, as I said, I'm still very good friends with David Wise, who I think did a talk a few days ago on music. And Dave's very famous for the theme tune to Donkey Kong Country and a lot of the music for Rare's video games. But DK Creations is myself and Dave Wise. That's Dave and Kev Creations, which coincidentally is also the initials DKC. But what we're trying to do, just to celebrate all of the time that we've been involved in video games and the time that we've worked together, just create something which offers tutorials and mixes live music, which we both enjoy doing, with the concepts that we come up with. Who knows, maybe there'll be some video games down the line and some other projects, but at the moment, we are just about to release our new project, which is Salamandos, which is a nod to the era of Battletoads for me. It's maybe it's what the Amphibians was going to be originally before we changed the name to Battletoads. But I wrote a story and I thought, how are we going to release this in our spare time? So Dave's going to write music for this story. I'm going to do the comic for the story, and we're going to release that in episodes. And along with that, say we're going to give some tutorials and advice, career advice, and just general fun thing that you're going to be able to buy possibly every month. Depends how much time we get every month in our spare time when we're not making video games. But yes, this is going to come out soon, and so we're quite excited about that. And so, yeah,
and we are waiting for the game.
Maybe the game will come. We'll see. But
it's a great concept. I really like it, and I just want to see the first episode of Salamandos as soon as I can.
We wanted something that we could, because we've done a lot of retro video game shows, and we've done live performances in Magfest in America and Retro Spielmessen in Norway. And so we wanted to perform something that we'd perhaps written ourselves rather than always playing older stuff. We needed to come up with something new. So I'd got a story and I'd got some characters, and we'd been talking about doing something like this for a long time. And it's crazy that we haven't done something like this. But now I realize why we haven't done it is because we just haven't got the time to do it. But in every spare hour we get, we are shoehorning this in there. So look out for Salamandos. We're going to release that soon. So, and if you check out our site, dkcreationslimited.com, you'll be able to find all the information on that there is. And so if we're all right for time, I can give you a quick talk about creating graphics now and how it compares to back then. Are we okay for time?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll skim through this really quickly now. So creating graphics now, the basic pipeline, it would involve creating concept art, much as we did back in the day, but it's not quite as rough and ready as it used to be. And so these characters, this character in particular would be from Yooka Laylee. So it's Playtonic's character, and it was the inept character, which was the boss on the first Yooka Laylee game. And also there was some little mini inept characters, which they were the little guys with the laser beams that would have patrolled the casino level. And as you can see, Gav asked me to do some concept art, and years ago we would have just done a thumbnail piece of post-it note paper with a scribble on it, but we have to invest a lot more time in building something now, and we can't afford to make too many mistakes. So nowadays we have to do a little bit more research and put a little bit more graphical experimentation and exploration onto a piece of paper before we decide what's going to work with the design. Whereas before, most things just moved along a 2D axis. And so there's so many things to consider now. So we have to make sure that everything is going to work with these characters before we put them in. And so I think we settled on something similar to this for one of the guys, and something like this. It was like a camera tracking system, which would stick on your monitor that would come to life. And so we wanted to make that into a boss character. And so now, if you can see there, it's basically you have a wireframe model, a 3D model. For anybody that doesn't know, for anyone that does know, I apologize if I'm just stating the obvious here, but for 3D graphics now, you would build this sort of polygonal mesh, and you can see here it's just made of lots of different triangles, and then the software points beams of lights at it, and it gives a material to all these triangles, and it creates what looks like a 3D model. And to begin with, we'll make a very basic model, and you can see here that it's made of quads. Each one of these quads would be split into 2 triangles, and so the computer will draw thousands of triangles and build up this 3D image. And then for the stuff that I was doing on Yooka Laylee, it's changed a little bit now, but what I was doing on Yooka Laylee was putting that into a piece of software like ZBrush, which is a 3D sculpting piece of software, and adding more detail, like all these little rivets here, and smoothing off all of the curves to generate different texture maps, which are then applied to this rough shape to give the impression of a lot more detail, because the computer or the console that it's running on is not going to be able to cope with this amount of level of detail at the moment, although we're getting there now because the technology's come on so far. But so you can see how it's constructed. You've got a pretty crude model there. There's no real curves on it, but you've then got almost like a piece of paper with a map, which is basically this model split into almost like a set of stickers. And this is a UV map. So each one of these coordinates here has a coordinate called a UV coordinate, which is the 2-dimensional mapping terminology that we use to create the texture, which then goes onto this. And then once we've built up all of these different textures, like we'll have one for the color and one for maybe all of the lights on it and one for all of the little elements of shading, you can start to make the character look a lot more solid. And so here you can see this isn't what's called an ambient occlusion map, which is, you can see it shows you all of the darker areas where light perhaps isn't reaching on the object. And by adding all of those darker sort of zones in there and combining that with the color map and possibly something that isn't affected by lighting, you can get all of these solid looking effects from your character. And that's what you actually see running around in the game. And then it doesn't run around, of course, until it's then got some kind of animation. And to give it the animation, you need to give it a kind of a hierarchy of joints, just like we've got. We've got a skeleton in the 3D model. And as you can see here, each of these different colors is coded to a different joint and a different part of the mesh, the 3D object. And this is all something that we were doing back in the day for Donkey Kong, but now it's doing this all in real time as it was on the N64, but with a lot more detail and a lot more special effects to make it look a lot prettier. But so this is deforming based on this mesh here and this set of joints here, sorry, and you would move all of these joints around and pose it until you can get a position like this, and then your character starts to come to life. And then along the bottom here, we've got a timeline. And so I might move the guy here like you would have done with a stop motion animation, set a keyframe here, maybe set a keyframe at the other end, which is exactly the same. And then in the middle, maybe I would pull his legs out a little bit and push his body down, and he would dip down, and then you'd play the whole thing and he just keeps cycling up and down and just looking like he's bobbing up and down. And that would be the simplest animation I would do just to test how the character actually operates. And then I would give it to Gary at Playtonic, Gary Talbot, who is our lead animator. He's been in the game for a long time now, and he's a really great animator. And he'll take it and do his magic with it, and maybe create what is called a rig, so that he can control it the way he wants to control it, as if it were a puppet, and he'll put some fantastic animation on it. So I will do the concept art, and I will build the model, and I will texture it, and then I will put a basic skeleton into the model and thread it and get it all working for Gary. And then Gary will take it and animate it and speak to the designer. And the designer will say, I need it to do this and that. And then if it needs modifying, it'll come back to myself and I'll do something to the model. And that's basically how the pipeline works. And so you can see again here, you've got the small character and there it is without any real textures on it. And there you can see it is with what's called a normal map, which it's kind of tricking you into thinking that there is a light source hitting detail at different points in the geometry to give out this extra kind of detail. And that would be taken from the sculpting software that I use, like ZBrush. So that's it. And that's what I do now. And I've got a few pointers here for people that are wanting to get into the industry that haven't done so, that maybe wanting to pursue a career in video game graphics. I'd say the first thing I would do is know what kind of style you like doing, because obviously my style isn't particularly realistic. It's very comical and a little bit daft and funky at times. So I'm not going to go and apply to a company that's doing photorealistic graphics, because I'm probably not going to be as good as that as somebody that really excels in that area or has got a lot of experience in that area. That's not to say that you can't try it out, but if you want to apply for a job, say Playtonic Games, make sure you're doing the right kind of graphics for that company before you start sending them all of your work, because you're wasting their time. You need to send them what they want to see and something that would look at home at that company's on that company's portfolio. And I would also get used to working with other people first. When my career was very different, because it started off working pretty much alone with just some help from Tim Stamper, but the company grew, and so you got used to working with a team environment, in a team environment with different people. And you have to do that with today's needs of making a piece of game and how many people are involved. You have to know how other people work and what's needed from you, and you have to sort of work in harmony. So it's a good idea to work on a project before you actually get working at a video game company. I think there's plenty of sites out there where people will be putting a project together and maybe they'll need an artist. So just take a look on some of the websites, on social media, and you might find somebody that's looking for an artist. And so I would advise you to do that if you can. Go through the right channels. Don't start hitting people on LinkedIn or emailing them personally. Usually if they're looking for an artist, they'll put it on their website. So just look at the company that you want to work at and similar companies, and just look on their careers page, and they should have something about what they're looking for. They may post it on social media, but go through the correct channels. Learn new skills. It's something I've had to do. You may come in as a games tester, but you may end up the designer of the next best video game that was ever created. A lot of the guys that I think in particular, the guy that's one of the lead designers at Rare Limited originally started out as a games tester at Rare, and that's Greg Mayles. And a lot of the guys that I've worked with that are animators may have been modelers first, or concept artists may now be modelers. So it's good to start branching out into different areas, because you never know, they may need you for that when you get to a company if they're short of staff. And so it's a good to have extra skills and add a new string to your bow if you can. So just take a look at other things, focus on your main skill, but look at concept art if you're a modeler, and look at perhaps building environments as well as characters. And don't stress. That everybody wants to work in video games, and there's a lot of video game companies out there, but you can bet that there's 50 other people looking for the same job as you. And don't take it to heart if you don't get the job. Just try again and try another company. Because I think one thing in particular, when I used to interview people at Rare, we'd have people try 2 or 3 times to get into the company, and some of them now are heading companies. It doesn't mean they're not good enough. It just means that they weren't perhaps what we were looking for at the time. So keep trying. Try a company again. If you didn't get through the first time, try again next time when they're looking. And if you then get the job and you are employed, one good thing to do, I think, is to know that style that you originally got the job through, and just improve on it, and maybe expand and look at doing more realistic graphics, or look at a different style, put your stamp on it. But it's good because, as you can see from some of the games that we're producing, we're having to bring them up to date, and maybe draw Battletoads in a different way, or draw whatever it is that is people want to see in the year 2022 rather than what was being seen in 1996. So you need to be able to evolve, learn newer skills. You know, I'm at Playtonic now, but I'm also doing UI graphics as well as a little bit of rigging, and I'm doing concept art, and you can get involved with design and scripting. So all of these things make you a much more powerful artist, and they give you a lot more confidence. So when somebody says, oh, we need a front end doing for this piece of software that we're working on, we haven't got anyone to do it, you can step up and do that, and you'll get brownie points for doing that too. So always try something new. And again, don't stress. Even when you're there, keep trying, because games get canned. I've worked on so many games that have got canned over the years, and as you saw, sometimes they evolve into something else, and sometimes you'll work on a game for 2 years and it'll get scrapped, but it's never really scrapped because you've learned something and you've been paid to do that game for 2 or 3 years, and often some of the best elements of that game will be taken and put into a different game, and you may see sort of evolution of that game released in the future. So you never know. That's just my nutshell advice. And other than that, if you want to get into the industry, my career path was a little bit different because I'm very old now, and it started a long time ago, and the industry was very different. So just I hope what you've seen maybe helps a little bit. And if you are trying to get into video games, good luck with whatever you do. And that's
really a nice piece of advice.
Okay.
And it's amazing. I think that we have some question for you. If you
okay, do you need me to share my screen still, or do you want me to turn this off? Or
you can turn this off, I think.
I turn the share off. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
I'm visible.
Yeah. Okay. They say, is the music in the show really yours?
Actually, it's me singing. That was from one of the, I've got a guy that is amazing French DJ producer called Willy Soul. If I can put in here in the chat, if anyone can. That's the name of the guy. And we were an outfit called Stereo Breakers. And I think if you Google that, you'll probably find that piece of music. But I was working with him on a few projects. And so I would write some music, and I'd do some lyrics, and I would sing the stuff. And it just seemed a good thing to put on the show reel of the silly graphics that I've got there through the ages, and it sort of combined everything. So yeah, that was me, and some amazing artists who we may be working with again in the future. But I might work with them, with Dave Wise, so we'll see.
Yeah, about David Wise, when we had David Wise here, he said that Diddy Kong Racing was his favorite project, and you said the same. What happened on the?
I think we'd all found ourselves. We'd moved on from 2D graphics to 3D graphics, and we were all a little bit older. We'd maybe people were married, and they'd got a real good established life at Rare. And I think that team in particular was creating Diddy Kong Racing, and we all loved racing at the time. We would follow the Formula One. We're all big fans of that, and we would go-karting, and so it was a great time to work on that game. And it was just an uplifting game to work on because of the colors and the fun that was involved in that. But also below us in the building, we were on the top deck, and the building below us, there was a team working on Banjo-Kazooie, and they were having a lot of fun creating that too. So I think suddenly we'd moved on from, I think at that time on the N64, you were seeing a lot of games which were maybe first-person shooters, which were all very nasty and dark, and there was blood, and it was very dingy, like Turok the Dinosaur Hunter and that you were killing things, whereas we were making some games here which we were inspired by Nintendo with Mario 64, and we just suddenly realized how fun it was to make a fun game. And so I think it just made us happier people at that time, because I just come from a fighting game which I loved, but it wasn't a nice game to work on because you were attacking other people, and so it was quite a violent piece of software to work on. It was great fun, but it was lovely to work on the color and the fun that was in Diddy Kong Racing. So I think it boosted everybody's morale. I think it was a very hot summer that year too. I think we were very warm. It was very sunny. So I remember.
There is another question. How did you manage to get over the frustration when a game you worked on got scrapped? That's a nice question, because I scrapped some games by myself. I make video games. I'm an indie developer, and some of my projects are totally gone, even after 1 year of drawing assets, drawing animation, stories, interaction. How do you stay motivated about this?
It was probably difficult the first time because you'd spent a lot of time. I was very young. I was maybe 16 or 17, and there was a number of different games that I was working on, and maybe I was working with 3 different software engineers, and maybe one game would get to be released and the other 2, all the work that I've done is gone. But there's a reason why it's canned, and there's no point in releasing something if it's not going to be any good, or if people aren't going to like it, or if maybe, for instance, there was a couple of games that I worked on the NES, which it was so late in the day for the NES's lifetime, and the new Super Nintendo was just about to be released. We could continue. We were maybe 2/3 of the way through a piece of software, which was a good looking game on the NES, but to finish that, by the time it gets released and hits the shelves, nobody's buying the NES anymore, and it would cost more. You wouldn't get the costs back that it had taken to develop that software. So there's always a reason for it. Maybe the hardware can't cope with what you're asking of the game, and maybe the game can be much better on the next piece of hardware. And so sometimes you have to make that decision too. But as I said, that it's never really, it's not canned. It's just part of your timeline of game creation, that some of the ideas may then end up in something else. And the Kremlin characters in Donkey Kong Country were originally in a video game concept we did called Eddie Stobart, I think. And it was about some guy that drifted through space. It was going to be like an adventure, like a Wing Commander kind of thing. And the guys that were going to be the enemies were the Kremlins, and they never actually saw the light of day because we didn't release it. But we took that and we made the best of it and put them into Donkey Kong because they work really well in Donkey Kong Country. So yeah, I think it's just the name of the game. Sometimes things get canned. It's just the way it is.
Yeah,
you still get paid for it. So
yeah. If you work for a company, yes. If you are an indie developer, not so much. But
you have to. If you're an indie developer, then you got to make that brave decision whether or not to continue. And I think it is a brave decision to make, but you usually find that it was canned for the right reasons. Usually,
I think so. Usually, you said that the Dinosaur Planet was Starfox Adventure. That was one of your favorite projects of your career, but Dinosaur Planet. I'm curious. It was a totally different story because there wasn't Starfox, there wasn't any of the Starfox team. It was a different story and a better story, or not?
I don't think it was a better story. It was a different environment, but because we'd got the space element, we could do anything with it. And when Nintendo approached us and asked us if we'd like to marry our two IPs together, as I mentioned at the E3 show, we thought, yeah, it makes sense, because we don't want to compete with Starfox. We've got a character that looks like a fox and is in space, and Nintendo, the kings of the foxes in space, have already got one. So we'd never really thought about it, because we were very rooted to the planet rather than the space element. And so we'd done a lot of work on the game, but it was nothing that couldn't be reskinned. And really, we just needed to improve on it, add some elements which would take it into the Starfox universe and modify the story so that it worked. And also we had the opportunity then to move to the next console, which made it an altogether better game. So I was really lucky to be involved in that story writing process, and I was asked to go to Nintendo and work on the story. And so we came up with something that fitted the new IP, and I think it worked really well, what we did. So,
and it's incredible because you worked on 2 Nintendo IP, and you done an amazing work, because the Fox McCloud character and the Star Fox team, they share some of your element from Starfox Adventure even right now.
Yeah, and I think you can look at the game and you can still tell that it was created by Rare Limited.
Yeah,
but it's Nintendo Rare. It's a mixture of the two styles there. I think it works really well.
That was an amazing time for the video game era. Yeah, there is a strange question. Why the desks explodes in GoldenEye? Do you know it?
You know, I'm not really that experienced with GoldenEye. I can remember playing it back in the day. I keep saying back in the day, like it was in the 1950s or something, but it was the 90s, which was like the last millennium. So it was a long time ago, but I can remember playing it 4-player, but I never really played it as a single player. I used to get the N64 and my friends would come around and we'd just play against each other in VS mode. But I would never really play it as I maybe played it for a short time. So I'm afraid I couldn't answer that question because I'm not that experienced with it.
No, it's okay. It was just a silly question. You met Shigeru Miyamoto when you was working on Starfox Adventures, right?
Yeah.
I seen the Digital Foundry special on Dinosaur Planet when you said that they say we have 2 type of animal that are similar, just bring one, bring Starfox in your game. And how was your meet with Shigeru Miyamoto? It was a kind of first time, or was one of the time that you have already seen him?
I think I'd met Shigeru Miyamoto very briefly and shook his hand maybe once or twice before, when Tim and Chris had introduced me to them when I was very young. And I didn't really take it all in at that time because I was so young, and I was just having a great time walking around the Space World show or E3 or CES or whatever it was. But I think when we were asked about merging the 2 projects together, I don't think Mr. Miyamoto was there. It was some other guys from Nintendo, and it was at a meeting at the E3 show, but I was there in that meeting. And then we got back to England, and then I got the message from Tim saying you have to go over to Japan to talk about the story with the software engineer and the designer so that you can make it work. So we got on a plane, I think a week later, and I spent the week there, and they were just lovely guys to work with. Actually, Shigeru Miyamoto came in and left us with the other guys to discuss the story, and it would keep coming in and check in from time to time, but he's the most polite guy and very friendly guy you could hope to meet. So it was a really, really great week. I wish I could have spent longer there. So, and I'm looking forward to going back to Japan and perhaps even walking past the Nintendo headquarters in Kyoto again one day. So, but yeah, good memory, brilliant people to work with.
I hope so. You have done an amazing work with Nintendo IP, so I really hope so. And for Yooka Laylee, you the two games are different, but the design of the character are similar. Is there any difference in creating a character for a game that is look like Banjo-Kazooie and the other one that looks like Donkey Kong Country, or is the same type of workflow for you?
Well, Yooka Laylee, the main two characters, Yooka and Laylee, were actually designed by Steve Males, one of the original members of Playtonic before I joined them shortly after they set up. And so I think the way they approached it to begin with was because the whole project was a Kickstarter campaign. They needed to produce a lot of artwork to show people what they were backing and make some pretty pictures so that people could see how the story was going and what the game was going to involve. But I think with Yooka Laylee and the Impossible Lair, the characters were already established, so it was easier to expand upon some of the moves maybe that they originally had in the first game. And we had to look at what works with 2D doesn't necessarily work in 3-dimensional games, you know. So the second game is more of a platformer, but it's obviously got the overworld element to that. And so we added some features and we had to tailor some of the way that the character controls. And we also had to tweak the way that the character looks, because maybe it doesn't read so well from a different angle. Because look, you very rarely would see Yooka or Laylee from the very top in the original game. And so we had to look at maybe change the design slightly. And because they were much smaller on screen, maybe we have to make their eyes bigger. And so I think over time, characters evolve based on their last game. And eventually you've got a one-size-fits-all video game character that can work in so many different genres of game. And at the moment, Yooka Laylee, it's still in its infancy, if you like. It's still a very new character. And who knows, maybe it'll look very different in 10 years' time or 20 years' time when we're on game 10. But it'll all depend on what the game's involved that he is going to appear in and what's asked of the character and what we need to do in the game. So, yeah, you'll approach the design of the characters based on the design of the game. But to begin with, I think it all starts with some sketches and to try and find something that's appealing, you know.
I do the same. I do sketches. I do shadow preliminary shadows on the sketches. So some sketches in 3D. I think it's the same, but you are right. The camera of the character of the game, how you see the character in the game, is really a focus on the character design later in the development. What are your favorite software right now? You like to draw? You like to do the 3D stuff? What is your favorite software?
I love using Maya or Maya, which used to be Power Animator, and that's purely because I've used it since 1991, 2 maybe now, I don't know, 93 maybe, a long time. And so I'm very comfortable with that. But for 2D stuff and for animation, which I think with the video which we put on at the beginning, the original part with the cutout animation cartoon characters, that was a piece of software called Toon Boom Animation.
Toon Boom, yeah, I know.
Which I bought it when I needed to do a video for the guys that I was producing the music for. And I had 2 weeks to get a video done. So I quickly learned how to put something very simple together. So there's not any real animation. It's sort of cut, almost like sprite puppet animation, cutout animation, if you like. And I quickly managed to get something in for that. I don't know where the whole video is. It's on YouTube somewhere. But for creating the comic for DK Creations and the Salamandos, I'm using Clip Studio Paint, which is just the most amazing piece of software.
Yeah, I use this too.
It's fantastic.
Paint. Fantastic, yeah.
And they should pay me to say that, because I've got about 4 different licenses of it now, and I use it a lot. I use it for video game graphics. I use it to create the comic. I use it to create the odd GIF or animation. I use it for all the promotional material for Playtonic. And I used it to create everything, but it's amazing software. Yeah, and of course, it's a vector. You can use vectors. I'm also using Affinity Publisher a little bit and Affinity Designer. I do use Adobe products too. I've always used those. There are things that Clip Studio Paint cannot do, but there are things that Photoshop can't do. So I sort of go between the two. But it's usually Maya and Clip Studio Paint for me. Those are the pieces of software I use. And for music, I would use Cubase.
Cubase, okay, okay. Because you do music, I am just so bad in music, and
this is the problem. You see, when you try and do everything, as they say in the UK, you'll be a jack of all trades but a master of none. And I've always said I don't think I'm the best artist in the world at all. There are some amazing artists out there, and there are fantastic animators, but because of what my work has involved, the path of what I've had to do at Rare and at Playtonic involves a little bit of everything. It makes you a strong candidate for applying for a position at a company, I think, because you can do some animation, you can do some modeling, you can do some concept art, and so you've learned a lot of different skills. Yeah. And I think I like that I can do a bit of everything, because it's more fun than doing just one thing again and again every day. So I like that my work is quite varied. One day I may be doing UI graphics, the next day I may be doing some concept art, and the next day I may be building a character and making it move around, and it just makes it great fun. So yeah, so be a jack of all trades, but try to master them all if you can.
Yeah. That's exactly what I do every day. So it's amazing to hear that I'm following your path, but without your luck. So it's an amazing.
Well, it's good enough. Sometimes I think with what I can do, I have always. A guy said to me when I worked at Rare that I said, "Oh, my art is terrible. I can't draw as good as this guy." And I think it was a Danish artist called Johnny Christensen, who worked on Dinosaur Planet, said to me, "Kevin, but it doesn't matter, because you know what Tim wants to see, and you know Tim is going to say yes or no. And if you know what Tim had a good idea of knowing what the public wanted to see, I can do maybe what people want to see, and then give it to somebody who can make a really good job of it."
Yeah, but it's true. It's true, because when I look at the cartridge of Donkey Kong Country, I can remember the animation, the first time that the Donkey Kong
the floor, yeah, you bang
the floor.
Yeah,
pat the floor. It's amazing. The first time that the music start building, everything of the game is a true love and passion project. It's really a remarkable operation, and I think that maybe today there are some games that can be very similar to this type of emotion. And some indie games maybe are more a candidate for this, otherwise that the AAA operations that it's not you said early when there was not the live show, that you worked on the Battletoads arcade games, and you worked with 4 people on that Amazon game.
Yeah.
There is a lot of people that works with 5 people, 4 people, 3 people that keep creating games and keep doing an awesome work. And I think that games like Dead Cells, sorry, are a really incredible atmosphere, a really incredible way of doing sprite art.
Small teams can really work. I mean, I'm friends with a couple of other guys that used to work at Rare, and you should get them to give you a talk at some point. It's the guys at Gory Detail, who did Rusty Pup and Parachute Stan. And that's a software engineer and actually the guy who created Conker from Conker's Bad Fur Day, Chris Seaver and Sean Pyle. And they work together at Gory Detail. It is just those two guys. And they know exactly how each other work, and it takes you longer when there's only two of you, but you have a clear focus of what you want to do, you know. But for a company, the more people that are there working on that project, the better the communication has to be, and everybody has to be on the same page with the design. Otherwise it starts to go all over the place.
About this, what's your sleeping schedule? Because I don't sleep at all.
I think I've got a puppy at the moment, so I have to get up quite early to let the puppy go outside. But years ago, back in the day, we would have gone to Rare very early. I would have got to Rare at maybe 8 o'clock in the morning, and I would have finished at least 9 p.m. We'd have had a break for lunch for an hour, and then we'd have had a break at 5 o'clock for maybe an hour or two, but then we would continue to work. And because we didn't want to do anything else, we would go in at the weekends too and continue to work on our games. And it was an exciting time, particularly when I was working on KI. I couldn't wait to drive into work and see, because I would leave all of my animation rendering overnight, and I would come into work the next day and press the button to see, I want to see what Tusk looks like with that axe. And then I'd find that when I left the work on the night before, I told it to render on the wrong camera, and all you would see is his foot doing this because the camera was looking at his foot. And then I'd have to set it all again, and then I'd go out to the shops because you couldn't do anything else while it was drawing the pictures a lot of the time. But that meant that you often left really late, maybe 10 o'clock, 10 p.m., just to make sure that it's working okay. And so I would then get up at 8 o'clock again in the morning after I got home and do the same every day. But now I'm a lot older and I can't do that kind of continuous looking at a screen and working on a video game. I have to take a break. I wear glasses now because I've done this for so long. But now I think you have to give yourself time off, because a lot of the time you can't see the mistakes you're making. You just start playing with those mistakes and making the mistakes worse because you're determined to fix them. You need to get away, which is good to have a puppy, because then I have to go and walk the dog, and I come back and then I will look at the graphics that I've done and say, this looks rubbish, do it again. And you usually do it really quickly then, because you can see the mistake straight away. So I'll go to bed maybe 10 p.m. and then I'll wake up at 6 in the morning, and then I'll start work at 8 in the morning, because at the moment I'm working at home because of the whole situation that we're all in. But we're all working with Microsoft Teams online, and it's working really well for us because we've already had some experience doing that, because some of us, I was already working from home a couple of days. But sleep, you can't get enough. You can't get too much sleep. Get you rest, because your eyes need it, definitely. And you won't think straight until you've had enough rest. So
many people still get brushed off when they say that want to work on video game industry. What motivated you to continue to work, and what advice do you can tell to people who are struggling in this situation? Because every time I say, oh, I work in video games, so can you fix my printer? That's one of the first things that they say to me. So what gets you motivated on this?
You mean, I don't quite understand what you mean. So for people that aren't getting responses from applying to video game companies, or
No,
for people
they
who are...
say the people that don't get the video game seriously. They say you want to work on video game, and it's not a really realistic
Not a
way
real
to
job.
not a real job. Yeah.
Everybody said that to me. Everybody. When it was the 1980s, it wasn't a real job. It was what people did in their bedroom, and a couple of geeks would get together and write something, and then everybody said they were a millionaire. But now it's a massive industry. And it's funny because it's bigger than the movie industry now. So I think in 10 years' time, there'll be a lot more people working in video games. And we don't just have video games now. We've got the mobile phones. Everybody has seen a video game at some point. But yeah, I got a lot of that. People didn't take my job seriously. They said, oh, I just draw little men all day. But it's entertainment, and people always want to be entertained. And if you are lucky enough to work in that industry, for me in particular, to see people saying Donkey Kong looks great 30 years later, it just makes me smile. And when I see games like this that I used to play, and all the games that I've made and worked on, and then people say, you made my childhood. When we did a show in Norway, Dave Wise and myself, we did some music, and then people were coming up and hugging us at the end of the show and say, I played this game, and every time you play that music, it makes me, I am 9 years old again. And I think video games had an impact on me, a huge impact. And I think anybody that loves them, if they can do it, they should work in them, because it's a really rewarding industry to work in. It might not make you rich. It might make you rich if you hit the big time and you're very lucky, but you do it because you enjoy it. And I mean, look what I'm doing. This is just fun, you know.
Yeah.
So don't let anybody tell you not to do it. I think a lot of people think that for something to be a job, it has to be hard work. And don't get me wrong, making video game graphics is hard work. When you're doing it over again, it's very repetitive. But if you love the video game, and it's very rewarding. So. And I don't think there's anything else I'd rather be doing. I don't think there's anything else I can do. So there you go. And I've done it for about 35 years now. So I hope I can do it for a little bit longer. But yeah, don't take any notice of anyone brushing you off. Just go for it.
Thank you. I think we are done with the question now. And I'm really... thankful to have speak to you. It's an honor to me to meet the guy that inspired me in many years with your...
It's great. It's an honor for people to ask you to talk about what you've done for so long. It's great. And if somebody asks for an article in a magazine and I have to write something for it, sometimes you may think, oh, I've got to do this. And you think, God, these people really want to hear this stuff. And I'm just an old guy that used to work at this company. But it's, you know, I hope anyone that gets into the industry has as much fun as I've had doing it. So, and I'm still having. So thank you very much for asking me to take part.
Okay. I will tell something in Italian to stop the...
Okay.
Ok. Grazie per essere venuti alla convention, ragazzi. Spero vi sia piaciuta questa intervista. Scusate per il mio pessimo inglese, ma sono estremamente eccitato perché comunque per me è una persona veramente incredibile. Domani non ci sono appuntamenti, se c'è soltanto il torneo se non il torneo di FIFA, e poi si riprende lunedì. Thank you, Kev, and really have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Thanks for asking me again. It was good. I really enjoyed it. My voice has gone a little bit dry, but
Thank you very much.
It's because I'm like this.